What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. 15 gruesome facts about Andrei Chikatilo, the Rostov Ripper. Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo, also known as the Rostov Ripper, the Forest Strip Killer, the Butcher of Rostov, and the Red Ripper, was a serial killer active in the former Soviet Union who killed 56 people between 1978 and 1990. He is one of several well-known Soviet serial killers, and inspired the chessboard killer. One of the longest killing sprees in history lasted for 12 years. Upon his final arrest, Chikatilo confessed to his crimes, showing little remorse for his victims. In fact, he seemed proud of his crimes. As he put it while on the stand, "I was like a crazed wolf. I recently transformed into a beast, a wild animal." In 1936, Chikatilo was born in the Ukraine, which was then a part of the Soviet Union. In 1992, he received a death sentence, and in 1994, he was shot and killed in the death chamber. He first experienced the thrill of murder after killing 9-year-old Yelena Zakotnova. Every serial killer usually begins with a single victim, who usually sets the tone for the subsequent murders. Yelena Zakotnova was the first victim in Andrei Chikatilo's case. When Chikatilo was successful in luring her into his home, she only had 9 years of age. There he tried to rape her but failed, so he began to stab her in the abdomen. He ejaculated onto her body as he did so. After this, he strangled her to death and then tossed her body into the Grushevka River. After this, Chikatilo only got worse and more violent. He mutilated Larissa Tkachenko with his teeth after beating her to death. Andrei Chikatilo came up to Larissa Tkachenko at a bus stop when she was 17 years old. She became his second victim. He talked her into going with him to a secluded area for some quiet time talking and drinking alcohol. However, once the two reached a forested area near the Don River, Chikatilo attempted to rape Tkachenko. He was physically unable to follow through with his plans, so he beat her to death with his fists, strangled her, stuffed mud into her mouth, and then mutilated her dead body with a stick and his teeth. In the process, he bit off one of her nipples. Then, rather than bury her body, he covered her with leaves and the pages of newspapers he was carrying on him at the time. He stabbed Lyubov Buryak 22 times and gouged out her eyes. Lyubov Buryak, Andrei Chikatilo's third victim, was only 13 years old. He attacked her as she was walking home past a remote bus station and dragged her into a heavily wooded area along the path. There he ripped off her clothing and proceeded to stab her to death. She was stabbed at least 22 times in her neck, head, chest, and pelvic area. The coroner found wounds in her eye sockets as well, proof that Chikatilo had gouged out her eyes. Apparently, the first stab wounds, those to her neck, were done from the back. Once he had her to himself, Chikatilo killed her immediately. He disemboweled 10-year-old Olga Stolmakhanok. Witnesses claimed to have last seen Olga Stolmakhanok walking off of a bus with a middle-aged man. He was innocently leading her by the hand, and the two looked like your typical father and daughter, except that she was actually on her way to her parents' house, and he was a serial killer. Stolmakhanok was led by Chikatilo to the remote farming community of Novoshakhtinsk, where he killed her. Before leaving her body where it was, he dismembered her, slashed her chest, and stabbed her more than 50 times. His 9th victim was she. Additionally, he slashed and mutilated his other victims. As with most serial killers, the murders committed by Andrei Chikatilo followed a pattern. All the victims were stabbed and slashed in very gruesome ways. Some had their eyes gouged out, while others were disemboweled. All of the bodies were discovered in remote locations, typically in the wooded suburbs of the city, and they were within reasonable walking distance of bus and train stations. Additionally, the bodies were only partially buried or concealed. All of Chikatilo's calling cards made it simple for authorities to link the deaths. He acknowledged having killed 56 people. Andrei Chikatilo's official body count stands at 56, according to his confession. Although most of his early victims were young girls, he was not overly discerning at the end, and killed young boys and a number of women as well. He was charged with 53 deaths, 18 women, 14 girls, and 21 boys. Tatiana Petrosyan, who is 29 years old, was his oldest victim, and Igor Gudkov, who is only 7 years old, was his youngest. He inspired other murderers, including the chessboard killer. Alexander Pichushkin, a serial killer, chose Andrei Chikatilo because he wanted someone to look up to. Pichushkin's goal was to out-kill Chikatilo, and he did. Pichushkin claimed to have killed 61 people, just 3 short of his goal of killing as many people as there are squares on a chessboard, while Chikatilo killed 56 people, a mix of men, women, and children. Another serial murderer, the granny ripper Tamara Samsonova, admitted to a friend that she was obsessed with Chikatilo. Samsonova was convicted of killing 11 victims, all people who lodged in her apartment building. Before burying them, she may have eaten parts of their bodies and apparently used a hacksaw to cut them up. Because he abused his students, he was fired from teaching positions. After finishing high school, Chikatilo attended college at Rostov University via correspondence courses. He had initially attempted to enroll at Moscow State University, but despite having received excellent high school grades, he was denied admission, possibly due to his father's poor military record. Chikatilo went to work as a teacher after completing his degree from Rostov and serving 3 years in the Soviet military, first as a border guard in Central Asia and then for the KGB. His first molestation victim was a 15-year-old girl whom he locked in his classroom. He was fired from that teaching job as well as a few others for the same reasons. He eventually gave up teaching and began working as a supply clerk for a company in Rostov, a job that gave him plenty of opportunities to travel around the country. He testified in court from inside an iron cage. The trial of Andrei Chikatilo began in April 1992. Throughout the trial, he tried several times to be found innocent on the grounds of insanity, but every evaluation that he went through found him to be completely sane. Chikatilo spent his time in the courtroom locked in a special iron cage, both for his own protection and to keep everyone else in the room safe. On October 15, 1992, he was found guilty and given the death penalty as well as 86 years in prison. He had a briefcase filled with murder implements. Many jokes have been made about people purchasing things that fit the category of a serial killer kit. Andrei Chikatilo actually had one. When he was finally stopped by Detective Alexander Sanisovsky in September 1984, Chikatilo had a briefcase filled with his killing tools, including a knife, rope, Vaseline, and a towel. Due to erroneous DNA results, he was arrested and released. Andrei Chikatilo began committing murders in 1978 and continued doing so until his second arrest in 1990. In 1984, his first arrest for murder did not go according to plan for the detective who made the arrest. Chikatilo matched the description after he was discovered lurking around a bus station. However, when law enforcement checked his blood type, DNA was in its infancy in the early 1980s, especially in the USSR, it came back as type A. The semen found on his victims was type AB. These days, DNA analysts know that it is entirely possible, albeit rare, for one person to have blood and semen with different blood types. Chikatilo was released to continue killing because this was even a possibility back then. He was raised in a hut with just one room, where he saw the horrors of the USSR. Andrei Chikatilo was born in Ukraine, then part of the Soviet Union, in 1936. After World War II, around 10 years later, the Cold War began. During this period, Chikatilo lived with his parents in a one-room hut on a small farm. They were allowed to grow food, but they weren't paid for their labor on the farm. Their neighbors were in the same predicament. Chikatilo's mother scared him by telling him that his older brother, Stepan, was kidnapped when he was just 4 years old and eaten by their hungry neighbors. During World War II, Chikatilo's father, Roman, was drafted by the army and eventually became a POW in Germany. This labeled him as a traitor, even though it was not his fault. Chikatilo's mother was raped by a German soldier while Roman was serving in the army, and she gave birth to a daughter named Tatiana while the Germans were occupying Ukraine. It goes without saying that Chikatilo did not have a good upbringing. He was humiliated by his bedwetting and impotence. It is believed that Chikatilo suffered from hydrocephalus at birth, and this led to lifelong health problems, including bedwetting and difficulty getting and sustaining an erection. His mother beat and berated him for wetting the bed they shared. When he was 15, he jumped on one of his little sister's 11-year-old friends and overpowered her, ejaculating in the process. He was mocked for this, and later mocked by girlfriends for his impotence. He fit the traditional serial killer description to a T. Anyone who watches the investigative Discovery Channel or shows like Criminal Minds knows that most serial killers fit a profile. That is, a middle-aged white male with a history of perversion and/or childhood trauma. Chikatilo fit this profile perfectly, as he was middle-aged, white male who was born into poverty in Ukraine, which was then a part of the USSR. He had a tortured childhood and struggled with sexual dysfunction. He was a known sexual pervert who molested his students while he was still teaching. It's clear in hindsight that he was the person law enforcement was looking for all along. He was by all accounts a devoted father. In 1963, Andrei Chikatilo entered into an arranged marriage with Feodosia Odnikeva. His sister introduced him to her, and just 2 weeks after they first met in person, he and she got married. Their union was plagued with issues, including his sexual dysfunction. Despite this, they managed to have 2 children, a daughter named Ludmila, and a son named Yuri. His family life was perfectly normal by outside appearances, and he was reportedly a good, devoted father to his children. Given that he killed children as young as 9 and 10, this seems even more bizarre. 15 gruesome facts about Andrei Chikatilo, the Rostov Ripper. Andrei Chikatilo, infamously known as the Rostov Ripper, the Forest Strip Killer, and the Red Ripper, was one of the most depraved serial killers in history, terrorizing the Soviet Union from 1978 to 1990. Over 12 years, he murdered at least 56 people, mostly women and children, subjecting them to torture, mutilation, and cannibalism. His heinous deeds shocked even seasoned Soviet investigators, and his trial became an inhumane spectacle. Below are 15 gruesome facts about Chikatilo's life, his methods, and the sheer brutality of his killing spree. 1. A 9-year-old girl was his first victim. When he lured Yelena Zakotnova, then 9 years old, into an abandoned shed in December 1978, Chikatilo's desire to kill began. He stabbed her multiple times in the abdomen, ejaculated on her corpse, then strangled her before dumping her body in the Grushevka River because he was unable to rape her because of erectile dysfunction, which was a problem he had on a regular basis. Why it's horrific. He later admitted that the killing made him feel exhilarated. His subsequent crimes of stabbing, strangulation, and post-mortem mutilation followed this murder's pattern. 2. He bit off a victim's nipple with his teeth. In September 1981, Chikatilo murdered 17-year-old Larissa Tkachenko, his second victim. He avoided raping her by beat her to death with his fists, suffocated her, stuffed mud into her mouth, bit off one of her nipples, covered her body with newspaper pages instead of burying her. Why it's so horrible. The sadistic bite marks were later used to link him to the crime. 3. He cut out the eyes of a 13-year-old boy. In June 1982, 13-year-old Lyubov Buryak became Chikatilo's third victim. He dragged her into the woods near a bus stop, stabbed her 22 times, neck, chest, pelvis, gouged out her eyes post-mortem. Why it's so horrible. The eye gouging became one of his signature mutilations. 4. He disemboweled a 10-year-old girl. Chikatilo kidnapped Olga Stolmakanok, a 10-year-old girl, from a bus stop in August 1983. He took her by the hand. People who saw him thought he was her father, and stabbed her over 50 times. Her body and dismembered her. Why it's so horrible. He used the same tactic to remove her internal organs in subsequent murders. 5. His youngest victim was a 7-year-old boy. Chikatilo targeted male as well as female victims. In May 1984, he murdered 7-year-old Igor Gudkov, his youngest victim. He lured the boy with candy. He was stabbed and strangled, mutilated his genitals, Why it's horrific. Proved he had no preference. He killed men, women, and children. 6. He ate parts of his victims. Chikatilo was a cannibal. He admitted to biting off nipples, eating tongues and other soft tissues, drinking blood from stab wounds. Why it's horrific. He claimed he tasted like pork when asked about human flesh. 7. He carried a briefcase containing a murder kit. His killing kit was found by police when he was arrested in 1990. Stabbing and mutilating knife rope for strangulation. To silence victims. Vaseline towels to clean up blood. Why it's horrific. Proved his killings were premeditated. 8. He was a pedophile and school molester. Before killing, Chikatilo was a teacher but was fired for molesting a 15-year-old student, exposing himself to children, sexually harassing female colleagues. Why it's so horrible. His pedophilic urges escalated into murder. 9. He was almost caught in 1984 but was released. Police detained Chikatilo in 1984 after finding blood-stained clothes, a blade, but Soviet bureaucracy delayed DNA testing, so he was let go. The real reason motorcyclists rev their engines at stoplights. Have you ever been stranded at a stoplight alongside a man riding a motorcycle with their engine running? Perhaps you've rolled your eyes and ignored what seems like an intentional display of masculinity and wondered what they're overcompensating for. On the other hand, you might have looked over out of curiosity, fantasizing about their wild and free existence and what it would be like to have your own bike to rev for no apparent reason. Maybe you've even interpreted their engine rev as an open invitation to race them when the light turns green. So, which interpretation is correct? Why do motorcycle riders seem to rev their engines when there is a red light? Well, it could be any of the aforementioned reasons, depending on the rider. However, the most common reason for a motorhead to rev up their engine is simply habit. Old habits die hard. If the motorcyclist is accustomed to riding older bikes, they may have formed the habit of engine revving out of functional necessity. Most older models use a carburetor to deliver fuel to the engine. This works fine unless a bike idles too long, such as at a stoplight, in which case the process can be disrupted by the drop in revolutions per minute, RPMs, causing the engine to stall. Revving the engine, also known as blipping the throttle, increases the RPMs, preventing the motorcycle from shutting down without warning. A majority of newer models use fuel injection technology that doesn't require manual adjustments for stabilization. Still, old-school motorheads could be performing the seemingly innocuous action purely based on muscle memory. Consider that the person revving the engine might not even be aware that they are doing so before you yell at them in rage. Revving for function versus revving for fun. If the engine revver is riding a brand new bike, they may also have a good reason. Count Motorcycle says that new engines need time to break in, which is roughly the first 1,500 miles an engine will run. During this period, it is advised that cyclists avoid a constant engine speed, to prolong the life of the engine and promote better gas mileage in the long run. When a motorcycle is idling at a stoplight, its engine is at a constant speed, which can be avoided with a simple blipping of the throttle. When a motorcyclist doesn't seem to be revving for any functional purpose, you might wonder if there's a hidden meaning behind their action. While bikers use common codes to communicate with other vehicles on the road, like pointing 2 fingers down as a friendly greeting, sometimes the only message they're trying to convey is, "Look how cool I am." The mechanical equivalent of flexing a muscle, there's always the possibility that a rider is revving for show, or even out of anger. While there are some biker signals you should never ignore in this case, you're probably better off not responding to avoid revving up the rider's ego or temper. The infamous man who got away has been called by many names: the Whitechapel murderer, the leather apron, but most know him by his seminal nickname, Jack the Ripper. One of the most studied and fascinating criminals in history, Jack the Ripper terrorized the Whitechapel district of London throughout 1888, and with his fame came stories, and with those stories came tales known throughout the world. Of course, just like any famous tale, audiences wanted to see the legendary killer's story told on the big screen, and over the last 100 years, Jack the Ripper movies have become a staple in popular culture and a legend on the silver screen. From more modern-day interpretations in films like From Hell and Jack's Back to some of the first films to ever feature the Whitechapel murderer in The Lodger and Man in the Attic, the story of the Ripper has been replicated, adapted, twisted, and fabricated into some of the most beloved works of fiction. Although no film could ever be as terrifying as the actual events of 1888, numerous attempts were made to give audiences the most terrifying experiences of their lives. Vote up the best Jack the Ripper movies, and then check out the best serial killer movies of all time to get fully ingrained in the minds of the morbid and murderous. Agree or disagree? From Hell is an extremely slow-burning investigative drama starring Johnny Depp as Inspector Aberline, a detective on the hunt for the serial masochist Jack the Ripper. It is arguably the greatest and most mainstream depiction of both Victorian London and the serial masochist Jack the Ripper. Loosely based on a graphic novel of the same name, From Hell wonderfully mixes its source material with real-life events to showcase a man on a terrible and dangerous downward spiral as he thrives to save all those he possibly can. Depp gives a fascinating performance, and this wonderful installment in the Criterion Collection continues to shine as a premier adaptation of the infamous Jack the Ripper. One of the most mesmerizing, fascinating, and vile depictions of Jack the Ripper the world has ever seen. The Lodger is a paranoid slow burn that will have audiences everywhere questioning everything they believed by the time the credits roll. With a phenomenal performance from Laird Krieger as a man suspected to be the infamous Jack the Ripper, this sympathetic portrayal of evil is brought to life masterfully by John Brom. A gothic thriller with stellar camera work, wonderful storytelling, and a grim and masochistic undertone, The Lodger is the film for those interested in a realistic portrayal of the Whitechapel murderer. But be warned, once looked into the eyes of madness, there is no going back. A classic Sherlock Holmes tale, legendary screen actor Christopher Plummer stars as the world's greatest detective as he is on the hunt for notorious killer Jack the Ripper in the masterful Murder by Decree. Featuring a plethora of phenomenal stellar talents such as James Mason, Donald Sutherland, and Susan Clark, this star-studded affair is one of the most prestigious and regaled tellings of the Whitechapel murderer the world has ever seen, as director Bob Clark delivers yet another classic film in his long line of masterpieces. A much darker and more sinister tale than most Holmes fans are accustomed to, this stellar drama will have fans of all ages hanging on the edge of their seat until the credits roll.